Part 1. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the quiet suburban neighborhood of Willow Creek. It was one of those late afternoons where everything seemed calm and ordinary, as if nothing out of the ordinary could ever happen here. The streets were lined with neatly trimmed lawns, flower beds bursting with color and driveways filled with cars that gleamed under the fading sunlight. But beneath this picture-perfect surface, tensions simmered, unseen, but palpable. Patricia. Howell lived in one of the newer houses on Elm Street, a modest two-story home with white siding and blue shutters. She had moved to Willow Creek 5 years ago with her husband, Greg, seeking what she called a better life. To Patricia, this meant safety, cleanliness, and neighbors who shared her values. And for the most part, she felt content. But lately, things had begun to feel off. There were more unfamiliar faces around, people who didn't seem to fit the image of the community she cherished. Sometimes, when she walked her golden retriever, Max, down the street, she would notice groups of teenagers hanging out near the park or sitting on benches. They weren't loud or disruptive, but their presence made her uneasy. Today, as Patricia strolled along the sidewalk with Max trotting obediently beside her, she spotted someone sitting alone on a bench near the playground. It was a young black teenager, his hoodie pulled up over his head despite the warmth of the day. He sat slouched slightly, his attention divided between his phone and the world around him. Every now and then he took a sip from a soda can resting on his knee. Patricia slowed her pace, her eyes narrowing as she studied him. Something about the scene felt wrong to her. Why was he here? What was he doing? Max tugged gently at his leash, eager to keep moving, but Patricia stopped altogether. She crossed the street, pretending to admire a neighbor's rose bushes while stealing glances at the boy. Her mind raced with questions. Did he live nearby? Was he waiting for someone? Or was he casing the area, looking for an opportunity to cause trouble? The thought sent a shiver down her spine. She told herself not to jump to conclusions, but the unease grew stronger with each passing second. Finally, unable to ignore her instincts any longer, Patricia approached the bench. "Excuse me," she said, her voice firm but polite. The boy looked up, startled for a moment before meeting her gaze. His expression was neutral, neither friendly nor hostile. "Hi," he replied simply, lowering the volume on his headphones. "I'm sorry to bother you," Patricia continued, clutching Max's leash tightly in her hand. "But I noticed you've been sitting here for a while. Do you live around here?" The boy hesitated, perhaps surprised by the question. Then he shook his head. "No, ma'am, I'm just waiting for my mom to pick me up." "Oh," Patricia said, trying to mask her skepticism. "Where are you coming from?" "The library," he answered without hesitation. "I was helping some kids with math homework." Patricia frowned slightly. The library wasn't far away, just a 10-minute walk, but something about his explanation didn't sit right with her. Maybe it was the way he spoke so casually, as if he had every right to be there. Or maybe it was the fact that he seemed completely unfazed by her questioning. Whatever it was, it only fueled her suspicion. "Well," she said after a pause, "you know, this is a nice neighborhood. People work hard to keep it safe and clean, so it's important that everyone respects that." The boy nodded slowly, his face unreadable. "I understand, ma'am. I'm not causing any problems." Patricia forced a thin smile. "Good, just making sure." With that, she turned and walked away, pulling Max along with her. But as she reached the corner, she glanced back over her shoulder. The boy hadn't moved. He was still sitting on the bench, scrolling through his phone like nothing had happened. Her heart began to race. This couldn't be normal, could it? A stranger lounging in her neighborhood, acting like he belonged. What if he really was up to no good? What if he decided to break into one of the houses while everyone was distracted? The possibilities swirled in her mind, growing darker with each step she took. By the time she got home, Patricia had convinced herself that action needed to be taken. She couldn't just stand by and let something bad happen. Grabbing her phone, from the kitchen counter she dialed 911. Her hands trembled slightly as she waited for the dispatcher to answer. "Woman, what's your emergency?" came the calm voice on the other end. "Yes, hi," Patricia began, her tone urgent. I'm calling because there's a suspicious person in my neighborhood. He's a young black male, probably a teenager, sitting on a bench near the park. He says he's waiting for his mom, but I don't think he lives around here. I'm worried he might be planning something. The dispatcher asked for details, the location, a description of the individual, and assured her that officers would be sent to investigate. As Patricia hung up the phone, she felt a mix of relief and apprehension. Relief that she had done the right thing, and apprehension about what might come next. Unbeknownst to Patricia, the boy she had reported was named Marcus Johnson. At 16, Marcus was known in his own neighborhood as a bright, responsible kid who always looked out for others. Today he had spent hours volunteering at the library, patiently guiding younger students through algebra problems. Afterward, he texted his mom to let her know he'd wait outside for her since she was running late. Sitting on the bench gave him a chance to relax and scroll through social media until she arrived. When the sound of approaching sirens broke the peaceful afternoon silence, Marcus looked up in confusion. 2 police cars rolled to a stop near the park, their lights flashing brightly. Officers stepped out, their expressions serious as they approached him. One of them gestured for him to stand up. "Hey, kid," the officer said. "Can we talk to you for a minute?" Marcus blinked, caught off guard. Sure, is everything okay?" "We're just checking things out," the officer replied. "Someone called us about a suspicious person in the area. That wouldn't happen to be you, would it?" For a moment, Marcus didn't respond. Suspicious person? Him? The accusation stung even though he knew better than to argue. Instead, he raised his hand slightly in a gesture of cooperation. "I'm just waiting for my mom," he explained. "She's picking me up. I'm not doing anything wrong." The officers exchanged glances, clearly unsure how to proceed. Before they could ask another question, a sleek black SUV pulled into the parking lot. Out stepped Angela Johnson, Marcus's mother, and the newly elected mayor of their city. Dressed in a tailored blazer and heels, Angela exuded confidence and authority. Her sharp eyes scanned the scene, taking in the police cars and her son standing awkwardly beside them. "What's going on here?" Angela demanded, her voice steady but commanding. The officers turned toward her, their postures shifting slightly, as they recognized her. "Ma'am," one of them began, "we received a call about a suspicious individual in the area. We're just investigating." Angela's jaw tightened. "That suspicious individual is my son, Marcus. He's 16 years old and was simply waiting for me after finishing a tutoring session at the library. Is there a reason why he's being questioned?" The officers exchanged another glance, this time tinged with embarrassment. "We're sorry, Mayor Johnson," one of them said quickly. "It seems there may have been a misunderstanding. We'll clear this up right away." As the officers backed off, Angela turned her attention to Patricia, who had returned to the scene, drawn by the commotion. Patricia stood frozen, her face pale as she realized the gravity of what she had done. For the first time, she truly understood the weight of her actions and the consequences they carried. And so what had started as an ordinary afternoon in Willow Creek had transformed into a pivotal moment, one that would ripple through the lives of everyone involved. Per 3. The days following the incident in Willow Creek felt like a storm brewing. News of what had happened spread quickly, fueled by social media posts, local gossip, and heated discussions at coffee shops and grocery stores. Angela Johnson's name was mentioned everywhere. Some praised her for standing up to injustice, while others criticized her for making a simple misunderstanding into something bigger than it needed to be. Patricia Howell became a lightning rod for controversy, with people either defending her actions as a concerned citizen or condemning her for perpetuating racial stereotypes. Angela decided to address the situation publicly during a press conference, scheduled for later that week. As the newly elected mayor, she knew she had a platform and a responsibility to speak out about issues affecting not just her family but countless others in similar situations. She spent hours preparing her remarks, carefully choosing words that would resonate without alienating. Her goal wasn't to vilify Patricia or divide the community further. Instead, she wanted to spark meaningful dialogue about implicit bias, systemic racism, and how these forces shaped everyday interactions. On the morning of the press conference, Marcus sat quietly in his room, scrolling through his phone. Online forums were ablaze with comments about him and his mother. Some messages were supportive, calling him brave and thanking him for sharing his story. Others were cruel, accusing him of exaggerating the incident or playing the race card. Reading them made his chest tighten with frustration and sadness. He hated feeling like a symbol rather than a person, as if his experience had been reduced to a debate topic for strangers to argue over. When Angela knocked on his door, he quickly minimized the browser window. "Hey," she said softly, leaning against the doorway. "How are you holding up?" Marcus shrugged, avoiding her gaze. "I don't know. It's weird seeing everyone talk about me like I'm some kind of example, like this is supposed to teach people something." Angela sighed, sitting down beside him on the bed. "I get it," she admitted. "It's not fair that you have to deal with this, but your voice matters, Marcus. What happened to you isn't just about you. It's about all the times someone else has gone through the same thing and didn't have the chance to speak up. You're helping shine a light on something important." Marcus nodded reluctantly, though he still looked skeptical. "Do you think it'll actually make a difference?" he asked. "Or will people just forget about it once something else happens?" "I can't promise anything," Angela replied honestly. "But I do believe that every conversation brings us closer to understanding each other better. Even if it feels small, it's still progress." Later that afternoon, Angela stood behind a podium in front of dozens of reporters, cameras flashing as she began to speak. She started by recounting the events of that day in the park, describing how a routine errand turned into a confrontation, rooted in prejudice. Her voice remained steady, but there was no mistaking the emotion behind her words. "This isn't just about my son," she emphasized. "It's about every child who has ever been judged based on their appearance rather than their character. It's about the fear parents like me feel when we send our kids out into a world that often sees them as threats before it sees them as human beings. And it's about the work we need to do, as individuals, as neighbors, and as a society, to dismantle the biases that keep us divided." Her speech struck a chord with many listeners. In living rooms and break rooms across Willow Creek, people paused to watch the broadcast, some nodding in agreement, others shaking their heads in disagreement. Social media erupted with reactions, hashtags trending nationwide as users weighed in on both sides of the issue. For every comment celebrating Angela's courage, there was another dismissing her perspective as divisive or unnecessary. Patricia watched the press conference from her couch, gripping a mug of tea tightly in her hands. Hearing Angela's words again brought back the guilt she'd been trying to suppress since that day in the park. She told herself she hadn't meant any harm, that she was simply looking out for her neighborhood, but deep down, she couldn't ignore the truth staring her in the face. Her call to the police had been driven by assumptions, not facts. Assumptions shaped by years of conditioning she hadn't even realized existed until now. Greg noticed her distress and sat down beside her. "You okay?" he asked gently. Patricia shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "I don't know how to fix this," she confessed. "Even if I apologize, it won't undo what I did. People already hate me for it." Part 4. The weeks that followed Angela's press conference brought a whirlwind of emotions and reactions to Willow Creek. The community, once known for its quiet charm and neighborly warmth, now felt fractured. Conversations at the local grocery store turned tense as people took sides, some defending Patricia Howell's actions as a well-meaning mistake, while others condemned her for perpetuating racial bias. Social media buzzed with hashtags like "Justice for Marcus" and "Your Safe Neighborhoods," each side using the incident to push their own narratives. Patricia found herself increasingly isolated. Friends she had known for years began avoiding her at the park or crossing the street when they saw her walking Max. Neighbors whispered behind closed doors, labeling her as "that woman" who called the police on a teenager for no reason. Even her book club, which she had hosted faithfully every month, suddenly canceled their next meeting without explanation. It was clear that her reputation in the community had taken a hit. though whether it was deserved or not depended on whom you asked. Greg tried his best to support her, but even he struggled to reconcile his wife's intentions with the consequences of her actions. He encouraged her to reach out to Angela and Marcus personally, believing a heartfelt apology might help mend some fences. But Patricia resisted, torn between guilt and defensiveness. "I didn't do anything wrong," she insisted. During one particularly heated argument, "Yes, I made a mistake, but does that mean I deserve to be treated like a criminal?" "It's not about deserving," Greg replied patiently. "It's about taking responsibility. You hurt someone, Patricia, even if you didn't mean to. And part of making things right is owning up to that." Patricia fell silent, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She knew Greg was right, but admitting fault felt like opening a door she wasn't ready to walk through. Instead, she retreated further into herself, spending hours alone in the house, replaying the events of that day in her mind. Each time, she tried to convince herself that she had acted out of concern for her safety and the safety of her neighbors. Yet Angela's words from the press conference kept echoing in her thoughts. Every child judged based on their appearance. Meanwhile, Marcus continued navigating life under the shadow of the incident. At school, he became both a hero and a target. Some classmates rallied around him, praising him for standing strong despite the unfair treatment. Others mocked him, calling him mayor's kid or accusing him of seeking attention. Teachers tiptoed around the topic, unsure how to address it without stirring more tension. For Marcus, the constant scrutiny was exhausting. He longed for the days when he could simply blend into the background, unnoticed and unremarkable. 1. Afternoon after finishing basketball practice, Marcus met up with his best friend Jamal at their usual spot near the library. They sat on a bench, sipping sodas and watching kids play tag in the distance. "You holding up okay?" Jamal asked, nudging Marcus with his elbow. Marcus shrugged, staring at the ground. "I guess. It's just, everywhere I go, people either want to talk about what happened or pretend it didn't happen. Neither feels real, you know?" Jamal nodded thoughtfully. "Yeah, man. People always turn everything into a big deal. Like, can't we just live our lives without all this drama?" Marcus sighed, leaning back against the bench. "Exactly. But then again, maybe it is a big deal. Maybe it's supposed to make people uncomfortable so they actually think about stuff." Jamal raised an eyebrow. "You sound like your mom." Marcus chuckled softly. "Maybe I am starting to sound like her. Doesn't mean she's wrong, though." As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the park, the two friends brainstormed ways to channel their frustration into something productive. By the end of their conversation, they had decided to organize a youth-led march against racial injustice. The idea excited them. It was a chance to take control of the narrative, to show the world that young people cared deeply about these issues and were willing to fight for change. Back at home, Angela noticed a shift in Marcus's demeanor. Gone was the defeated slump of his shoulders. Instead, he moved with purpose, drafting flyers and reaching out to classmates to spread the word about the march. She couldn't help but feel proud of him, even as worry gnawed at the edges of her heart. Activism came with risks, especially for Black teenagers, and she feared what might happen if the wrong people interpreted their message as threatening. Still, she knew better than to discourage him. This was his journey, and he needed to walk it in his own way. The night before the march, Angela joined Marcus in the living room, where he was finalizing plans with Jamal over video chat. When the call ended, she turned to him with a small smile. "You've got a lot of courage," she said. "Not everyone would step up like this." Marcus shrugged, though a hint of pride flickered in his eyes. "I'm just tired of feeling powerless, Mom. If we don't speak up, who will?" Angela nodded, understanding completely. "Just promise me one thing," she added gently. "Stay safe out there, keep your head high, but also keep your guard up." "I will," Marcus promised, giving her a reassuring hug. On the other side of town, Patricia finally worked up the courage to take Greg's advice. She reached out to Angela privately, leaving a voicemail asking if they could meet to discuss what had happened. To her surprise, Angela agreed, suggesting they meet at a neutral location, a small cafe downtown. When the day of the meeting arrived, Patricia arrived early, her hands trembling as she clutched her purse. She spotted Angela sitting at a corner table, sipping a cup of tea. For a moment, Patricia hesitated, unsure whether she should approach. But then Angela looked up, catching her eye, and gestured for her to sit. "Thank you for coming," Patricia began, awkward. "Help me write the last paragraph of part 4. Angela listens carefully to Patricia's apology, responding with grace but firmness. Patricia admits she's been attending counseling to understand her biases, and Angela shares her hope that the community can learn from this moment. End the section with a reflective note about progress being slow but possible. Part 2. Angela Johnson stood with her arms crossed, her sharp gaze fixed on Patricia Howell. The air between them felt heavy, charged with tension that neither woman seemed willing to break. Marcus, still standing near the bench, watched his mother carefully. He knew Angela wasn't one to back down from a challenge, especially when it came to protecting her family or standing up for what she believed was right. But even so, he could see the frustration simmering beneath her calm exterior. Patricia shuffled uncomfortably under Angela's stare. She glanced at the officers, who were now retreating to their cars, clearly eager to distance themselves from the escalating situation. Her cheeks flushed red as she tried to gather her thoughts. I didn't mean any harm," Patricia stammered finally, clutching the leash of her dog tightly in her hands. I saw him sitting here and thought something might be wrong." Angela raised an eyebrow, unimpressed by the explanation. "Something might be wrong," she repeated slowly, her voice laced with skepticism. "You saw my son, a teenager minding his own business, and decided to call the police because you thought something might be wrong?" Patricia hesitated, her mouth opening and closing as if searching for the right words. "It's not like that," she said defensively. "I was concerned. This is a quiet neighborhood, and it's unusual to see someone just sitting around like that." Marcus frowned, shaking his head slightly. Quietly, he muttered, "I wasn't doing anything." Angela turned to him briefly, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "I know, sweetheart," she said softly before turning her attention back to Patricia. "Let me make something very clear," Angela continued, her tone firm but measured. "My son is not a threat. He's a good kid, smart, kind, and responsible. And yet people like you seem determined to turn him into something he's not simply because of the color of his skin." Patricia flinched at the accusation, her eyes widening in disbelief. "That's not fair," she protested weakly. "I wasn't thinking about race. I was thinking about safety." "Oh, really?" Angela shot back, her voice rising slightly. "Then why is it that every time a young black person walks through this neighborhood, someone calls the police? Why do we have to constantly justify our presence, explain ourselves, prove that we belong? Tell me, Patricia, when was the last time you called the cops on a white teenager sitting on a bench?" Patricia opened her mouth to respond but quickly closed it again, realizing she had no answer. The truth was, she hadn't thought about it that way. To her, calling the police had seemed like the logical thing to do, a precautionary measure to ensure her community stayed safe. But hearing Angela's words made her question whether her actions were truly motivated by concern or something deeper, something uglier. The silence stretched awkwardly between them until Greg Howell, Patricia's husband, appeared on the scene. He had been alerted by a neighbor about the commotion and hurried over to investigate. Spotting his wife standing face to face with Angela, he immediately sensed the tension. "What's going on here?" he asked cautiously, glancing between the two women. Before anyone could respond, Angela spoke up. "Your wife called the police on my son," she explained bluntly, gesturing toward Marcus. "For absolutely no reason other than the fact that he happens to be black." Greg's eyes widened in shock. He looked at Patricia, who avoided his gaze, then at Marcus, who stood quietly beside his mother. Finally, he turned to Angela. "I'm sorry," he said sincerely. This shouldn't have happened. If there's anything we can do to make things right. Angela sighed, her expression softening slightly. An apology would be a start, she replied. But more importantly, your wife needs to understand the impact of her actions, not just on my son but on everyone who looks like him. Calling the police on innocent people based on stereotypes isn't just wrong, it's dangerous. Greg nodded solemnly, clearly embarrassed by the entire situation. You're absolutely right, he admitted. Turning to Patricia, he added, gently, we need to talk about this, honey. Really think about what happened today. Patricia bit her lip, her face a mixture of guilt and defensiveness. She wanted to argue, to insist that she hadn't done anything wrong. But deep down, she knew Greg was right. There was something unsettling about the way Angela's words had struck a nerve, forcing her to confront uncomfortable truths about herself and her biases. As the confrontation began to wind down, Marcus finally spoke up. Can we go home now? He asked, his voice tinged with exhaustion. The weight of the afternoon's events was starting to take its toll, and all he wanted was to escape the stares and whispers of the growing crowd that had gathered nearby. Angela nodded, giving his shoulder a reassuring squeeze. Yes, let's go, she said. Before leaving, however, she addressed Patricia one final time. Think about what I said, she urged, because until people like you are willing to acknowledge these issues, nothing will change. With that, Angela and Marcus climbed into their SUV and drove away, leaving Patricia and Greg standing in stunned silence. The park, once peaceful and serene, now felt tense and unwelcoming. Neighbors lingered awkwardly, unsure whether to approach the couple or retreat to the safety of their homes. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Patricia sat alone in her living room, staring blankly at the television screen. Max lay curled up at her feet, oblivious to the turmoil swirling in her mind. Greg had gone upstairs to shower, giving her space to process everything that had happened. But try as she might, Patricia couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over her. She replayed the conversation with Angela in her head, dissecting every word, every accusation. Was she really guilty of racial profiling? Had her actions been driven by prejudice rather than genuine concern? The questions gnawed at her, refusing to let her rest. Greg eventually joined her, sinking onto the couch beside her. Are you okay? He asked gently, his brow furrowed with worry. I don't know, Patricia admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I feel terrible, humiliated, angry, confused, all of it. Greg nodded sympathetically. It's a lot to process, he acknowledged. But maybe this is a wake-up call for us, a chance to reflect on how we view the world and the people in it. Patricia sighed heavily, tears welling up in her eyes. What if she's right, Greg? What if I am racist? Greg placed a comforting hand on her knee. It's not about being racist or not, he said thoughtfully. It's about recognizing that we all have biases, and sometimes those biases lead us to make mistakes. The important thing is learning from them and trying to do better. Patricia wiped her tears, nodding slowly. I guess I should apologize to Angela and Marcus. Properly, I mean. Not just because it's the right thing to do, but because I owe it to them. Greg smiled faintly. That's a good first step, he encouraged. And maybe after that we can look for ways to educate ourselves, to understand these issues better, for both of us. The conversation left Patricia feeling a mix of emotions, guilt, shame, but also a flicker of hope. Perhaps this incident, as painful as it was, could serve as a catalyst for growth. Maybe it wasn't too late to change, to become someone who contributed to solutions rather than perpetuating problems. Meanwhile, across town, Angela and Marcus sat together at the kitchen table, sharing a quiet dinner. The mood was subdued, each lost in their own thoughts. Angela could tell Marcus was still processing the day's events, and she gave him space to speak or not, whenever he was ready. Finally, Marcus broke the silence. Do you think she'll ever get it, Mom? He asked, his tone tinged with skepticism. People like her, I mean. Do they really change? Angela considered the question carefully before responding. Some do, she said honestly. Others don't. But the ones who are willing to listen, to learn, and to grow, they're the ones who give me hope. Change doesn't happen overnight, but it starts with awareness. And today, Patricia became aware of something she may have ignored before. Marcus nodded, though he still looked doubtful. I just wish it didn't always feel like we're the ones who have to prove ourselves, he said quietly. Like we're guilty until proven innocent. Angela reached across the table, taking his hand in hers. I know, baby, she said, her voice filled with empathy. And I hate that you have to carry that burden. But remember this. You're strong and you're loved. No matter what anyone says or does, never let them make you doubt your worth. Marcus managed a small smile, squeezing her hand in gratitude. Despite the challenges they faced, he knew he was lucky to have a mother like Angela, someone who fought tirelessly for justice and equality, not just for her family, but for everyone who deserved better. As the night wore on, the city of Willow Creek settled into an uneasy calm. Conversations sparked online and offline, with some residents siding with Angela and others defending Patricia. Social media buzzed with hashtags and debates, amplifying the divide within the community. But amid the noise, seeds of reflection began to sprout. For every argument and accusation, there were whispers of curiosity and openness, a desire to understand perspectives different from one's own. And while the road ahead promised to be long and difficult, moments like these reminded everyone involved that change, however imperfect, was possible. Part 5. The meeting between Angela and Patricia at the cafe was tense but civil. Patricia spoke first, her voice shaky as she struggled to find the right words. I want to start by saying I'm sorry, she began, her eyes fixed on the table in front of her. What I did was wrong, and I see now how it hurt Marcus, and you. I never meant for that to happen. Angela listened carefully, her expression calm but unreadable. When Patricia paused, she nodded slightly. Thank you for apologizing, Angela replied, her tone measured. It takes courage to admit when you've made a mistake. But an apology is just the beginning. What matters most is what comes next, how you choose to grow from this moment. Patricia swallowed hard, nodding in agreement. I've started going to counseling, she admitted, to understand, well, why I acted the way I did. I don't want to keep making the same mistakes. Angela's face softened, though her gaze remained steady. That's a good step, she said. Bias runs deep and it's not something we can unlearn overnight, but the fact that you're willing to confront it, that's progress. The two women talked for nearly an hour, sharing their perspectives and discussing ways to bridge the divide in their community. By the end of the conversation, Patricia felt a glimmer of hope, not absolution, but the possibility of redemption. Angela, too, left the cafe with a renewed sense of purpose. She knew the road ahead would be long and difficult, but moments like these reminded her that change, however incremental, was possible. In the weeks that followed, small signs of progress began to emerge in Willow Creek. Inspired by Marcus and Jamal's activism, students at the local high school formed a diversity club aimed at fostering understanding and inclusion. The group organized workshops, film screenings, and open discussions where teenagers could share their experiences and learn from one another. At first, attendance was sparse, but word spread quickly, and soon the meetings were packed with eager participants. Even adults in the community started taking steps toward healing. Greg Howell, encouraged by his wife's efforts, reached out to Angela privately to offer support. Together, they planned a series of community dialogues designed to bring residents together to discuss issues of race, privilege, and belonging. The first meeting drew a modest crowd, with attendees ranging from longtime neighbors to newcomers eager to make a difference. Some shared personal stories of discrimination or bias, while others confessed their fears and misconceptions. Though opinions varied widely, the atmosphere was respectful, even hopeful. Patricia attended reluctantly, sitting quietly in the back row as others spoke. Hearing their experiences forced her to confront uncomfortable truths about herself and her role in perpetuating stereotypes. Slowly, she began opening up, sharing her own struggles with guilt and self-doubt. Her honesty surprised many, earning her cautious nods of approval from those who had once dismissed her entirely. Despite these efforts, tensions lingered. Not everyone was ready to forgive or forget. Some residents clung stubbornly to their beliefs, arguing that incidents like the one involving Marcus were isolated misunderstandings rather than symptoms of systemic inequality. Letters to the editor continued pouring into the local newspaper, debating whether the incident reflected broader issues or was simply an unfortunate coincidence. Social media remained a battleground, with hashtags and memes amplifying divisions. Yet, amid the noise, there were quiet victories. A neighbor who had previously avoided Patricia struck up a conversation at the park, complimenting her dog and offering a tentative smile. A teacher at Marcus's school introduced a unit on racial justice, encouraging students to reflect on their own biases and privileges. Even the police department reviewed its protocols for responding to calls involving suspicious persons, emphasizing de-escalation and cultural sensitivity. For Marcus, life slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. The march he and Jamal organized drew hundreds of participants, including students, parents, and teachers from across the city. Holding signs with messages like "End racial profiling" and "We are all human," the crowd marched peacefully through the streets, chanting slogans that echoed far beyond Willow Creek. Local news outlets covered the event, highlighting the voices of young activists determined to create change. Though the attention sometimes overwhelmed him, Marcus found solace in knowing he wasn't alone. Friends, family, and even strangers rallied around him, offering encouragement and support. Angela watched proudly from the sidelines, marveling at her son's resilience and leadership. "You're doing important work," she told him one evening, as they sat together on the porch. "Don't ever lose sight of that." Marcus smiled faintly, leaning back in his chair. "It's exhausting, though," he admitted. "Sometimes I feel like no matter how much we try, nothing really changes." Angela placed a hand on his shoulder, squeezing gently. "Change doesn't happen all at once," she reminded him. "It's like planting seeds. You might not see the results right away, but every effort counts. Every conversation, every protest, every person who wakes up and decides to do better, it all adds up." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, mother and son sat in companionable silence. The neighborhood around them seemed quieter than usual, almost peaceful. Somewhere in the distance, a child's laughter rang out, followed by the hum of crickets settling in for the night. Willow Creek was far from perfect. Its scars ran deep, and its wounds would take time to heal. But for the first time in weeks, there was a sense of possibility, a fragile yet undeniable hope that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. Progress was slow, uneven, and often painful, but it was happening nonetheless. And so, as darkness fell over the suburban streets, Marcus and Angela allowed themselves a rare moment of optimism. They knew the fight wasn't over, not by a long shot, but they also knew they weren't fighting alone. Together, alongside countless others, they were planting seeds of understanding, compassion, and justice. And someday, with enough care and patience, those seeds would bloom into something beautiful.